Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Islam Study Circle. As is our custom, we'll start off with studying a Quranic verse. The verse is being displayed before you. This is verse 35 of Surah Maida, which is the fifth surah. Its words are Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wabtaghu ilayhi alwasila wajahidu fi sabilihi la'allakum tuflihun. Believers, fear God and seek His nearness, and for this strive for His cause, so that you may prosper. A very simple verse and a very, very powerful message that you have to seek God's nearness. You have to come close to Him as far as possible. You see, God is so affectionate, He's so caring, He's so kind, He's so gentle. But at the same time, there is one thing that eludes Him from us, and that is that we cannot see Him. We cannot feel Him, but yes, we can experience Him. We cannot touch Him. So, as far as experiencing God is concerned, it is just a question of opening our eyes to the world around us and, of course, to the world within us. So, the world around us includes the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the winds, the sea, all these elements of nature. If you look, they are all meant to nurture humankind. And then we have our extended family, our own family, our siblings, our parents, our children, all of them, they bring great joy and comfort to us. And within us, if we look at our own selves, we see how immaculately, how precisely, and how fantastically the systems that function within our body, they go on and on and on. And how the heart starts to pump when we are born, and it continues right up to our death. It's like a battery, it's like a super battery, which is functioning and functioning and functioning. So, if we are able to look at some of these favors and treasures of God that He has blessed us with, we are bound to come close to Him. And this is what the verse is telling us, that we should strive for His cause and come near Him. Of course, this would be something that would be in our own benefit. All of us, we need support. And time and experience have shown us that all supports except God are temporary. Supports go away. The closest of our supports may be there with us for some time, but he or she might pass away. Similarly, there are so many things that we cannot even share with our closest of friends, but with God, everything stands shared by default. And this is something which gives us tremendous support. At the same time, of course, it also gives us this it makes us cautious, and it also prods us that we in no way should transgress His limits, because we might not be seeing Him, but He is, of course, and absolutely seeing us. At all times, He is watching over us. And hence, this is something which should give us assurance, and at the same time, the fear that we must not cross His limits. So, to come closer to God, as we can see, the first and the most basic step is to look at the blessings that we enjoy from Him. And we have not earned these blessings. It's not that we were entitled to these blessings or we deserve them. They are purely a gift of God. And whenever we feel uncomfortable, whenever we feel disappointed and dejected in life, all that we need to do is look at these blessings and these favors that we enjoy. And because we take some of them to be granted, we lose sight of them. So we have to make a cautious effort actually, and consciously we have to realize that these are some of the gifts that God has given us. We might not see Him giving those gifts to us, but basically He is the first cause of giving us those gifts. At the same time, we also must realize that God is looking after us, our needs, our requirements, and a lot of times when we supplicate before Him, when we invoke Him, when we beseech Him, He answers our prayers. And many a time we feel that our prayers are answered. And sometimes, of course, they are not answered. But on most occasions, when we look back and see why the prayers that we wanted to get answered were not actually answered, and we do find that, well, it was good that they never got answered, because later on, or as the events fold later on, and we look back in hindsight, we do see that had things happened the way we would have wanted them to happen and expected them to happen, we would have been pushed into a wrong direction or taking a wrong decision. So you see, when we look back, we find that God is actually protecting us. We might not feel that protection at the time that unexpected thing happens. But as we go along in life and we look back, and the events themselves show that God is protecting us from a lot of things that we might, out of our own haste, out of our own narrow vision, might want them to happen or we would like to acquire them. But God somehow stops those things from happening because He knows that they are not good for us. The third important thing that can connect us to God, of course, is to share our blessings with His creatures. Because this is something which is a given that God Almighty, when He gives us these blessings, so He has told us in the Quran that one of the reasons that He has given us comfortable uh, circumstances and the joys and luxuries of life is to test whether we share these luxuries and joys with other people who are underprivileged or in a spot of bother or not. So let us be extra careful. Let us have that extra eye, a keen mind to sight people who are in need, who might not be uh, willing to come to us because of their self-esteem, but it is we who have to reach out to them. So to share our blessings with God's creatures, regardless of their religion, regardless of who they are, where they are, and what relationship they have. In this relationship of affection, there are no boundaries. Affection has no boundaries. It has to be across the board for every single one, and not only for just our own friends, but even for our rivals. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he used to pray for his rivals, and that is something that we should also do. That at times our prayers they get answered. Maybe God changes the heart of someone because of our prayers, of course. So that is something we need to do. Or kindness is something that we need to show even to our enemies and to our rivals. And finally, this kindness should not be just confined to human beings, even animals who are on many occasions defenseless. They are dependent on human beings for their needs, just as a child is, just as an old person is. So we need to be very careful while fulfilling the needs of our animals. For example, if they are pets, they are like being given in our custody. We have to look for them, we have to care for them, feed them, make them go out for a walk, and all their physical and biological needs have to be met. And the most important thing is to provide them with a habitat in which they can live a comfortable life. So, by sharing our blessings and by looking across people, this is something that is surely going to benefit us. And finally, and last but not the least, one of the most important ways to connect to God is through the Quran. By studying the Quran, by being able to go through the Quran every single day of our lives. And I always suggest that we should try to have two parts toward the Quran. We should signify, we should dedicate two parts that go to the Quran. So one of these parts is that we simply read a translation of the Quran every day from a random page, maybe for a few minutes. And we will feel that every time we read the Quran, we pick up the Quran and we read a couple of pages, there's going to be something, some guidance in it for us. Something will come up, something will pop up. And we would see that, yes, this is something that is like my takeaway from today's lesson. And the second path to connect to the Quran is to make a long-term strategy of learning Quranic Arabic, of understanding Quranic Arabic, so that when the Quran is read or when you hear it, you are able to directly understand just as you would understand your own language. This is a super boost that we can find because you see, God would be speaking to us. And if we are able to understand God directly from His own words, the impact that these words have, the profound and the potent influence that they have on our hearts is unmatched, is unparalleled. It's indescribable. We just cannot put this feeling in words because now the extra thing that we gauge from a translation that cannot be gauged from a translation is that not only will we be understanding what God is telling us, but at the same time, we will be motivated to act upon what He is telling us to do. So it's like a boost that we would be given if we understand the words of the Quran. And this is something which is indispensable, something that we are really missing in our lives. We might understand the Quran and that's it. But the thing is that how we can adapt and adopt the ways of the Quran is something that can really work if we are able to understand the Quran from the words of God. And I've often suggested that there are a number of apps that you can, through which you can learn Quranic Arabic. I'm not referring to Arabic itself because that's a longer route. I'm referring to Quranic Arabic. So just start off this journey and you will enjoy it as soon as you start off. Because you see, when you start learning Quranic Arabic, you'll be going through exercises which are related to the verses of the Quran, in which you are able to make sense of those verses in your own language. So the bottom line, as we can see, which this verse tells us, is that we have to fear God, which means that we must fear His anger, and that anger is not something which is private. It is basically, it stirs when He finds that we are doing something which is against our own benefit. So God's anger is not a private anger, not something that He has for His own self. His anger is because we are doing something which is against our own benefit. So that is why the verse starts off with ittaqullah, fear God. And secondly, it says wabtahu ilayhi al-wasila, that you have to find that way to procure God's nearness. And I've just suggested some strategies that can help that. And of course, these strategies are the same that are described or implied by the later part of this verse, wajahidu fi sabilihi, that strive for this cause. And if you want to come close to God, if you want to procure His nearness, then this is that you need to do. Strive for His cause, la'allakum tuflihun, so that you may prosper, so that you may succeed. And this success, this ultimate success, of course, is something that will be achieved in the hereafter. Now let us move on to the next segment of our study circle, and this is something that is from a hadith of the Prophet, and it actually tells us that the wealth that we might have is a trial. So I'm just going to read the translation. It's reported by Amr ibn Auf. He reported that God's messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, "By God, it is not poverty which I fear for you. However, I fear that you would be given abundance in wealth the way those before you were given. Then you begin to compete with one another for them as they did, and this may destroy you as it destroyed them." So, a very apt, a very appropriate advice from the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. And that is that it's not the want of money that is something that the Prophet fears for his ummah. It's basically an abundance of money or wealth or riches that makes him fear for his people. Because once you live a luxurious life, once you live in comfort, once you enjoy these blessings of life, you get infatuated by them. And then slowly there is a chance that you might gradually lose sight of God Himself, the provider of all these things. So it becomes a great trial. Wealth becomes a great trial. Obviously, this does not mean that we should not earn money or we should not become wealthy. That is not what the point is. The point is that if this wealth is around us, then we have to be extra careful, that we should not succumb to its lures. We should not then start forgetting our moral and our spiritual duties, which is quite likely to happen. So wealth, if we have it, it's a great blessing of God. The best way to use that wealth is to spend it on other people. Obviously, our own needs have to be met, our personal needs, our business needs, our needs that we have in our current lives, and of course for the future. All these needs are understandable. But what is besides all these needs regarding our present and future, that is something which the Almighty wants us to spend for His cause. And if we do so, then we can see that wealth will not become a trial for us. It will become a blessing for us. It will be a boon rather than a bane. Because now we are using a blessing of God for the cause of God. Something which God gave us, we are just returning it to the society in which we live. So a point of very important concern that is raised in this narrative is, as the Prophet has said, that I fear that you be given abundance in wealth the way those before you were given, and then you begin to compete with one another for them as they did. So one thing which wealth really produces is this dash to acquire more. This greed is something that comes upon us as soon as we enter this rat race. It's a race that we enter into, and then there is no end to it. So the Prophet, sensing that this might happen to people, because of course in the future we know how the Islamic kingdom expanded territorially and it's expanded far and wide. And this was something that brought in the treasures of the Roman and the Persian empires. They were absolutely dumbfounded. They were on their knees and they could not say anything but to submit to the authority of the Muslim empire. And this was something that the Prophet was perhaps envisioning, that this abundance in wealth is going to happen. And he also knew that in the past that the Israelites, their predecessor nation, they had a lot of wealth in their own times. And of course, if you look at the eras of King Solomon and King David, then of course these were two outrageously outrageously beneficial for every single human being who lived in that era. And looking at how people succumb to this challenge, how they succumb to this greed, of course, made the Prophet give this example to us as well, that we should not forget what happened in the past. Because once you start acquiring wealth and wealth becomes your purpose in life, then you're lost. You have lost the way. And unless and until we realize that this wealth is something that is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end, we will always be acquiring for more and more. And this is like a thirst that will never be quenched. Greed is a thirst that never quenches. So, very rightly, the Prophet, it seems, is cautioning and warning his followers that do not do this. Because if you start relying on your wealth, if you make earning your wealth the sole purpose of life, then that's going to destroy you, just as it did the previous nations. Now, let us go on to the third segment of our study circle, which is Bible verse that we will study. This time we'll study actually 4 verses. These are from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter number 22. About the book of Deuteronomy, it has often been clarified here on this forum that the book of Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Pentateuch, which is the Torah, and this is the revised law. The revised law means that basically in the first 4 books, the Torah was given in the chronological order, in the historical order, and just as the Qur'an was revealed in a chronological way, of course, and not compiled in the same chronological sequence, but it was given a new sequence in the later part of the Prophet's life. In a very similar way, it seems that this happened with the Torah as well, for Prophet Moses, that for the first 4 books describe the events in the historical order, and this book, which is the book of Deuteronomy, actually compiles those in a new order and presents it before people. And that is why the word Deuteronomy also means the revised canon or the second law, which of course means that it's given once again in a new compact form. So this verse, this chapter 22, verses 1 to 3, they read like this: If you see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering, do not go by without helping, but take them back to your brother. If their owner is not near, or if you are not certain who he is, then take the beast to your house and keep it till its owner comes in search of it. And then you are to give it back to him. Do the same with his ass or his robe or anything which has gone from your brother's keeping and which you have come across. Do not keep it to yourself. One thing that you can note from this passage is said repetitively is that the word brother is used, which actually, before even things become crystal clear, it lays the foundation that our relationship with our brethren is that of brotherhood. They are like brothers and sisters to us. And so, if we come across anything which might be belonging to some of our brothers and sisters, then it is our duty to first look for the owner. Maybe the owner is nearby because he might have just left that thing. It could be an animal wandering away, or it could be a robe, as the verses say, or something else. But the thing is, you must not just go by it as as the verses say, do not go by without helping. So you see, the most important thing is that because you are brothers and sisters to one another, the Quran does not want us to just flip away and not notice that there are things that have reached us, that have come by us, and we can help out in restoring those things to their original owner. So, two things that have become immediately prominent is that these verses speak of our relationship with our fraternity, and that is of brotherhood. There's no more close a relationship than this. We are siblings to one another. We should feel for one another. We should be absolutely kind and gentle to one another. And then the second thing is that whenever we see someone in a spot of bother, we should not just ignore it, thinking that, well, that is not my business. It belongs to someone else's. It is something else, someone else's problem. Why should I come and solve it? No. These verses also tell us that these are your brothers, and if something has been lost by them, then, and that thing also comes to your notice, then it's not something that you should just go by ignoring it or evading it. You should take charge of the situation, try to look for the owner, and if you don't find the owner nearby, then bring that thing to your house and still keep on looking for it, because it's now entrusted to you, it's now in your custody, and all the more reason that you're even more careful with what is being entrusted to you. At times, of course, people, when they realize that they have lost something, they do make an announcement, they do come nearby, especially the place where they might have thought that they've lost that place. And you just need to be vigilant that someone might actually ask out whether the thing that he had lost or she had lost is available to other people, or they have secured that thing for him or her. So a very, very important lesson that we as human beings, we have to help out one another. And the examples that you see that are given in these verses are, of course, appropriate to the tribal society of those times. So you see a brother's ox, his sheep, his ass, or the animals that they would normally use in a tribal life. They're all, and in a nomadic life also, they're all mentioned here. And of course, then this is another example is given that he or she has lost the robe that might be missing, and that you come across it. That also is something that you must be careful about. Take it in your own custody and then look for the owner. And these are small things. Honestly, these are very small things. But always remember that small things have huge impacts on our lives. They actually shape our destiny. They actually make us people who care for other people, who look for other people, look out on about other people who might be needing us, and above all, who make us vigilant that we are brothers and sisters of one another. We just simply cannot ignore a person who is in a problem, who is in a spot of bother, who is in some difficulty, especially if we are in a position to solve that. So this brings us to an end to our third segment. Now we are going to go towards our fourth segment. This is basically a moderated session in which all of us, we would like to hear all of you, some of the opinions that you might have. It's like wisdom sharing, it's like experience sharing, so that we can learn from one another. And the topic is countering hate. So just a small introduction. Of course, all of us, when we go through our various routines and we have various life issues coming across us, one of the things that we do encounter are rivals, people who are against us. And then the very next thing that we encounter is that these rivals are not going to sit quiet. They are going to spill over their hate, their malice, their anger, and try to bring down us. So what is to be done? How can we counter this hate from our rivals? Over to you, Mariam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. If you could please explain a bit more in the sense that are you facing this kind of hate on social media only or also in person?
Actually, this is a general topic. This is something which is a generic thing. This hate could be faced virtually or in real life. Hate is something, it does not need a means of communication. It is there in every form. It could be through hate mail, it could be through a hate speech, it could be through a relative, it could be through a friend, it could be through social media. I mean, it's like things that come our way. So, of course, as I said, that there are a couple of things that I might add as well, that there are some areas that we have no access to, even if that hate comes to us, for example. We are not in a position to reply to that because the person who has just sent a silly message or a hateful message is not there, is no longer there. He just has a fake ID maybe, and he or she has done his job. Uh, Obviously, that is the only way that we should ignore such things. But when when we are aware of the identity of the person who is spilling that hate, who is actually trying to show his hatred by doing things and by bringing us down, then what do we need to do? Should we also shun that person? Should we start hating that person? Should we isolate ourselves? Or what should we do?
Thank you very much for the explanation, Dr. Saleem. I'll start off with my 2 cents, and then I look forward to the participants just also start engaging with their thoughts. So, first of all, in my experience, I haven't had someone like, besides, in high school when people are a bit dumb, but like, besides that, no one has like outwardly like tried to hurt me. Directly. It's always been either with certain words or like the way they talk about me. And so with that, like when they're trying to jest at me, for example, my brother is really skinny. I'm very chubby. So when
Mhm.
when they see us together, sometimes like there was one specific person who he was like, "Oh, do you always eat your brother's food?" And I'm like, "No, I don't." But like, do I need
Mm,
to explain that to him? And also, you know,
mm,
and then like years later, some people when I would share the story, they'd tell me with like sassy remarks to come up with, but I
mm,
always like it never sat right with me because I'm like,
mm,
this is disrespectful to him. He's an older person, so like making sure that whatever
mm,
kind of hate you're getting, don't degrade yourself to that level that you
mhm,
forget your respect, your own morals, and you don't want to go down to their level.
mm,
If they're doing
mhm,
something that they don't like, that if they're doing something that you don't like, first try
mhm,
to assess why don't you like it. And there was some truth to his what he said. Back then I was like fat. So I had to work on myself and lose weight. But so like take the criticism, like think about it, don't just immediately shun someone and call it hateful
mhm.
without even considering what they're saying. The other
Sure.
thing is that sometimes you might think people hate you because of like either the way you're saying certain things or your thoughts or like the way you try to show yourself, and sometimes it's
Mhm,
because they just don't know you enough. So like
mhm,
trying to have an honest conversation with them if you think they're up to it,
mm,
in the right environment. Of course there's a right time and place for everything. So having that conversation with them, trying to understand what is it that they're bothered by, that they're trying to
mhm,
put you down, that's another helpful thing. If all else fails and they just want to hate on you for no reason,
mhm.
then at that point, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and you live with your life. You let them do their
Correct.
thing. As long as
Yeah.
you know that you are in the right,
Mhm.
I think that's what matters. And, of course, if you've done what you could and now nothing else is working, just do your own thing. So,
Correct. I think that these are very good suggestions and very valid points, especially the one that, you see, when the person speaks hatefully, we dismiss that person immediately. But I think you've made a very wonderful point by stating that a person might utter something in a disrespectful way. His words might have spite in them, but they may be based on the truth. Maybe they have some partial truth. Maybe they're saying something that we need to reflect on. And often we don't, because when we see that the person has used very bad words, so we are just put off. So I think this is something that needs a lot of patience and discipline, and also the fact that you have a yearning to improve yourself. That's very important, because when you see someone telling you in a very bad way, in a hateful way, but the thing itself is substantive, then we need to ignore that the garb in which these things were uttered and concentrate on the substance. So thank you very much, Mariam, for these beautiful suggestions.
Thank you. And now we're going to wait for the participants. I think we're having sort of a slow start because no one has raised their hands yet. Salman Aziz, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, I think it's a very vast topic and there are multiple dimensions. Just to add to another thing which you said, that one of the dimensions of the hatred can be the hatred that is originating in my own self against
Mm-hmm.
anybody. So we have to look about that. And regarding the topic, I can say that countering can be taken in a way that we are talking about channeling this hatred. If we go, I know
Mm-hmm.
it's ayat or hadith that my prayers, my hatred, and whatever I have is for Allah
Mm-hmm.
subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think this emotion of hatred, if it's originating in me, it should be channeled
Mm-hmm.
towards the good, towards the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the things which please Him.
Mm. But I think the point that Salman has made is also relevant that if your emotions are channeled or channelized, I would say, on the way of God, is that when you love someone, it is because of God. When you hate someone, it's because of God also. Then, of course, that also has a point. But one more thing is that when you hate someone for being, for example, a liar, or you hate someone because that person is continuously unjust, or you hate that person because he has maltreated weak people, or all these bad things that might emanate from a person. Yes, I think the hate should be there, but I think we need to distinguish and make this more refined, and that is that hate should not be towards that person, but to what he is doing. So it's not the sin. I mean, it's not the sinner which counts as much as the sin. So let us hate the sin, not the sinner. And for that, we have to be extra, I would say, cautious, and at the same time, extra loving to a person who does something wrong. So the Quran at one place, in fact, has gone on to describe this very beautiful motto, I would say, in Surah Hamim Sajda, where it says that idfa billati hiya ahsan fa izallazi bainaka wa bainahu adawa ka'annahu waliyyun hamim, which means that if you recount or counter every bad behavior, with good attitude, then you will see that a person who was your ardent enemy, he becomes your bosom friend. So it's like gaining that moral ground, gaining a moral victory on your rival. Yes, you would not like what he did, but it's not that you don't like the person himself or herself, because both of them, they are creatures of God. God has made them. Yes, they have gone astray, or maybe they are not doing something in one section or sphere of their life. But then, as a well wisher, as a person who belongs to the fraternity, it should be our wish that that person gets corrected. That person who has lost his or her way comes back to the path that has been ordained by God. And for this, as I said, as the Quran has said, that every bad behavior, every rivalry, every hate, whatever is possible, of course, counter it with good behavior, counter it with love, counter it with affection. By, for example, maybe at times if you are in a position and if that person has some good habits and good points, and the time comes for you to bear witness to them, then be more generous by appreciating some of the good points that he might have or she might have. Remember, everyone is not a devil incarnate. Is not someone who is, doing bad, and there's nothing good in that person. Every person has some good in himself or herself. It's just a question of spotting that goodness. So spot that goodness in the person who's your rival and who's hating you, and try to appreciate that in front of him and before others, if the chance arises. And at the same time, smile at that person, be polite to that person if you encounter that person. Maybe on occasions you can give some gift to that person just to express your solidarity, because you see, these things make the other person realize that I am doing something that I need to revisit. So countering hate with hate, I would say, is not the right solution. It'll just breed more hate. And people will go to extremes. The best way, or a very possible way, at times it is not possible. At times you need to remain quiet or just ignore that person. But wherever possible, countering hate with love, is something that, I think many righteous people have practiced, and even prophets of God, if you look at their lives, the way they would ignore people, they would forgive people, they would love people, they would sit with people. I do remember that there's one place in the Bible also in which Jesus, peace be upon him, he was sitting with certain evil people, and the Pharisees and the Jews and people who always were his critics, they came to him and said that, teacher, why are you sitting with these evil people? And the reply that he gave was absolutely sensational. He said that, well, I have not been sent to the righteous. I have been sent to the wrongdoers. I have not been sent to the righteous because they're already pious, they're already righteous. I'm sent to the wrongdoers. So that is why I'm sitting with them, because I would like to reform them as much as I can. So this is the concern that we all must have as human beings, as members of the same fraternity, that yes, we would not like that person to behave the way he or she is doing so, but at the same time, we would like that person to change, or if not to change, then at best start thinking that there's something better that he or she could have done. So this is just a one-point agenda that has been mentioned in the Quran regarding countering rivals and countering hate.
Let's, Salman, Aziz, did you want to add anything?
I just want to add the same thing that Dr. Saab has already said, that we have to hate the sin and not the sinner. We have to hate the crime and not the guy who is being accused. And just want to add, in the initial stage, we can say that because at times people don't understand what they're uttering, what they're saying or doing is hurting the feeling of other. So to make them understand is the very basic step can be that to ask them to be in the shoes of the other person. That a same
Correct.
thing being done to you, then what will you be doing? Although it is not valid for the second step, because we have seen people, unfortunately, in Pakistan, killing other people in the name of hate and the name of religion, thinking that they're doing something sacred, something nice. But for the initial
Right.
stage, it that you got to be in the other person's shoes to make yourself understand that what feeling or what hurt is the other person or pain going through.
Correct.
Thank you for that addition. Omar Farouk, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Yeah, it's a very diverse topic. Obviously, there's a racial hatred, there is religious hatred. Anyway, I'll just raise one point. In societies, I was reading somewhere that if you participate other any cultures, other celebrations, obviously you have to take care of right and wrong. So personally, I have seen that if like other groups or other religious people are celebrating, and if it is possible to show your happiness with them, so they really accept it very nicely, and this brings a lot of negative emotions down. But I know it's also a difficult
It's a difficult thing. Correct.
yeah.
So that is why. The Quranic verse that I quoted from Surah Hamim Sajda, the very next verse says, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا, that this attitude can only be adopted if you have tremendous patience, if you have this resolve, you're steadfast, that basically you are forgiving people for the sake of God. You're not countering hate with hate for the sake of God, because you would like to earn God's nearness, because you would like to become close to God, because you would like to earn His forgiveness. You therefore forgive other people. So I think it's a very tall order, it's a very tough ask, except as this verse says, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا, that only people who have tremendous patience can actually fight and go ahead with this cause, because it's going to just take its toll, because people, when they start bringing you down, they say all sorts of words, they create all sorts of problems and nuisance as well, and it's not difficult to counter hate with love.
Thank you very much. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Wa alaikum
Uh,
assalam.
no, Dr. Saab, when one sees so many injustices happening around them all the time, happening to ordinary
Mhm.
good people and people who are in power, continue to do evil acts constantly. The newspapers and the websites
Mhm.
are filled with such news on a daily basis. Sometimes I find myself, every time a zalim perpetrates a new act of zulm, Dr. Saab, I find myself feeling a certain kind of happiness in my heart, because I'm thinking that this is God making their sin pleasurable to them. Look at them, they are indulging in
Mm.
their sin in an even deeper fashion, which means that
Mm.
God has decided that He will not
Mhm.
make them return towards goodness, and therefore their
Mhm.
place in hell is assured. And so that makes me
Mhm.
happy. Do you think that that is hatred, and do you think that that's a justified feeling?
I think if you were living in the times of the Prophet, it would be justified. Because you see, for such people, if you are to hate them, the Almighty tells the Prophet that they are no worthy of being loved because they have forsaken God, they have forsaken His messenger, and they need to be punished. They'll be punished in the hereafter and this world also. For if you were living with Him and you had this insight from God Himself, then I think it was justified. But in today's times, we don't know what is going on in the mind of every person, how a person might change, how a person is behaving. So we have to be well wishers of humanity. And the Prophet himself has beautifully actually said this at one occasion when he said that ad-deen and nasiha, which means that religion is, if you sum up religion in one word, it's to be a well wisher of your fraternity, of your brethren. So, to be a well wisher, of course, is someone who would not enjoy a person who is, doing something bad and he is going deeper into sin, and you feel that, yeah, okay, that is something that you can do, and God is not going to take you to task, and you'll not be able to come out of the ignominy that you are going through. So I think that in on such occasions, it's always better that you pray for the forgiveness of that person, and you pray that God changes his heart, and at the same time, of course, try your best if you can play a role. If that person is in your contact, and if somehow you can come near him, because you see, our purpose is to save people from fire, and that is what the Prophet used to say, that I've come over to you to save you from God's wrath, from the fire of hell. So this should be something that should be our primary concern. I mean, it's not our wish to push people towards hell. In fact, God Himself has said this, that it's not that He has designed people for the purpose of creating people who are vicious and violent and they end up in hell. So the purpose is to create people, to give them the chance to live their life and prove themselves worthy, that they were given this option of expressing their will in the right way. So I think the overall scheme of God and the way the prophets of God have also expressed it does tell us that we have to try our best to save people and not to enjoy their misery or their punishment.
Dr. Saab, am I allowed to just sort of like put this question in another way? Like, certainly, I'm not
Okay.
speaking about. Certainly, I'm not speaking about people, who have personal failings, who might
Mhm.
indulge in, some acts which might be wrong.
Mhm.
I'm talking about, or I'm thinking about people who have done society wrong, like
Mhm.
like they have amassed, huge amounts of wealth, whereas the people
Mhm.
around them are poor and sick and dying of hunger, and they do
Mhm.
not have they can't afford education for their children. And then these people use death and terrorism to uh, create political power. I'm talking about such ill
I
people.
do understand. Yes, I do understand your point. But you see, whether they do these things out of misconception, as is the case with religious terrorism, or they do it out of spite, or there could be any motivation. I think our stance should be that we pray for them that God changes their heart. So remember, this happened in the times of the Prophet also, when he had gone to Taif, and he was actually brutally. He was People threw stones at him. They dragged him, and they did all sorts of things. And Gabriel appeared to him and said that Should I destroy your people who have done these things to you? And he said, no. From their own loins will emerge a new fraternity, and maybe they themselves also they realize that they are doing wrong and they mend their ways. So I think, as I said, that unless we know that a person has been condemned from God, which is something that we can only know if we live in the time of the prophets of God, because that is the time when we are sure that, I mean, God is destined hell for such a person. Only then we should not, of course, have this attitude. Other than that, our attitude should be that if a person is doing something wrong, if he is very greedy, if he has amassed wealth at the expense of his nation's uh, nation's welfare or other experiences, then my prayer would be that God give this person the insight, as long as he is living, to change his ways. Maybe one day he is able to realize this wrongfulness, and the wealth that he has, he can just try and distribute it back to the society, give it back to the society. This has happened in the world as well, that people do come to realize that they have done something very bad, and then they just totally reverse in their lives. So why not be on this part, or on this side of the truth, that we pray that the person's heart changes. I mean, if he doesn't change, of course, we can do nothing. But our well wisher, as a well wisher to that person, is something that might work for him, that might work to change him. So I think this is what we should do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I'd like to ask more participants that can discuss on countering hate.
Yes, we will have a shortened session today. We will be finishing at in 1 hour, which is 9 o'clock our time.
Oh, okay.
So we can maybe now reserve the remaining time for
Q&A.
general Q&A.
Sorry, I wasn't aware of the shortened session. So let's start with the Q&A then. Our first question asks, and this is referring to the first segment, why is jihad mentioned here in this ayah is meant with striving and not fighting by taking up arms, because the previous ayah talks about countering the mufsideen?
Because, of course, this is one of the usages here. I mean, whatever the previous verse, it's not relevant. That if you remind me of the previous verse, I don't think there's any previous verse which tells you that you have to take up arms. So the word jahada, in fact, in the Quran means to strive. And you know what? It is very interesting to maybe note this, that the Quran has said that the greatest jihad is not done by the sword or with your weapons. It says, Jahidhum bihi jihadan kabira, referring to the Quran. Jihad bil Quran, that you fight with people through this Quran. Of course, implying and referring that use this supreme book of God as a means to convince people, as a means to persuade them, as a means to make them realize their folly. So, Jahidhum bihi jihadin kabira, it's called a kabir, jihad-e-kabir, which means that the bigger jihad is through the Quran itself. And the other jihad, which is actually called qital, which means that now you are striving for his cause in a way that you can even sacrifice your life. So occasions for that are specific. For example, when you're fighting a war, or maybe someone is attacking you and you are defending your territory, maybe even your home. So these are the ones in which you pick up arms. Other than that, a very major part of our lives would be, maybe in today's scenario especially, that the chance of picking up arms might never ever come in our life, because we have standing armies, and if there ever a chance comes to fight the enemy, the army would do that. So a very greater part of our life should be in fact spent, as the Quran says itself about itself, that Jahidhum bihi jihadin kabira. The Prophet is being told that you should fight with these people through the Quran, which means use this Quran as your beacon, as a lighthouse, and make them realize that this is the word of God, how it can really change people and their opinions and their hearts. So that is why this word has been used. So the word is not jahada, which is the proper word for jihad. It is jahada, which means mujahada, which means struggle and strive. And that is why it has been translated thus.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, and this is particularly on social media, but sometimes in person too, there are organized campaigns that spread religious hatred against the companions of the Prophet, and they're asking, how do you counter that?
Ignore them. If they are doing something which is nonsensical, which is absolutely preposterous, the more you take notice of them, the more they're going to just ignite themselves and burn even more. The best way for such propaganda is to ignore it, because Islam or the Quran or personalities of religion, they don't need any such thing to bring them down. They are already established in this world. They have a position that is unchallenged. In fact, if we start grappling with these issues, we basically come down and we do something which is below the integrity of these personalities and books like the Quran or the Old Testament. The best way is to ignore them. And if you ignore such things, they're just going to, just finish away or die away. But the more you take notice of them, the more they're just going to escalate.
Thank you very much. The next questioner asks if you could please kindly share some resources for understanding Quranic Arabic for a beginner.
Well, there are so many apps. If you just write Quranic Arabic in your iStore or Play Store, there are various apps, and I've seen some of them. They are very good and very effective, but it all depends, how you are placed. There are readers who are aware of the Arabic alphabet. For them, there are certain apps which might be more useful. There are others who are not aware of the Arabic alphabet and they have to start ab initio. For them, there are certain other apps. For example, people who are conversant with the Urdu language, they already know the Arabic alphabet, mostly. So for them, it is easier if they pick up a certain category of apps. And for the others, they would need to go to a more basic understanding of the alphabet itself. So because of the fact that these backgrounds of people regarding the knowledge of the alphabet and the language itself differs, so I would just suggest that just go through some of the apps, and through a small trial and error method, you will come across the ones that are beneficial to you. But yes, I can tell you this thing, that there are plenty of them, and at times it becomes difficult to choose from them. But if you just look at the first 5 or the first 10 that come up in the search, and then just make yourself comfortable, you'll get to know which one is appropriate for you.
Thank you very much. Ammar Rasul, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, Ghamidi Saab has said many times during many of his talks over the years that this world is built, is not built on the basis of justice, and this world is a test for us all. So, when we see a tyrant fall and get punished in this world, should we see that as sort of like God's handiwork, or should we just see that as politics? How do you see this?
It depends, and it's at times it's difficult to also point out. When a tyrant falls, it could be because of the fact that at times he faces the music because of what he had done, and the atmosphere, the society, and the environment was tolerating that person for some time, and then of course they got fed up, and then they started some revolution or a movement, and then just removed them. So it all depends how it has happened. But if you look at events in hindsight, then in history there are certain things that you might see, that you might think that there is the hand of God working. For example, if you take the case of the Jews, so about them, the Quran tells us that one after the other, they'll be exiled from one place, and they'll gather at one place, and then be beaten up or exiled from that place. And so they will be always living like nomads, always migrating from one place to another. And if you look at the history of the Jewish peoples from the times of Christ, from the times of Jesus, peace be upon him, and right up to these times, there are books that have been written on this, and you'll see how the events in history have actually shown that the hand of God is there, that they got a place, a stronghold in for example, in Europe. If you look in 13th, 14th century Europe, they had a stronghold in Spain. They were persecuted there by the Christian rulers. And again, later on, there were instances in which they would find themselves that they got a stronghold, and then they would be they would be just exiled from that place. And the last incident that has happened almost a century ago was in the times of Hitler, when he took them to task. Of course, this cannot be justified the way he did it, but as you can see, it's like the God Almighty telling them that if you continue to deny 2 prophets of God, if that is something that you're going to take up, then you will face ignominy in this world. And this has been the fate of the Jewish people, and people who might be thinking that Israel today, in the last 50 or 60 years, has gained not only independence, maybe is further strengthening itself. It's just a question of time, because again, the law of God is that they will not be able to stay there long. The only thing is that the life of a nation or a country is larger than our own life or our own estimate. It's not like a couple of years, it might be some 50, 60, 70, or 100 years, and then again that downfall takes place. So this is a cycle of life that you can see. So laws of God, if you review them in the light of history, they can yield something very, very definitive. Otherwise, I mean, it's difficult to point out how tyrants and how despotic rulers and how they met their fate. It could be purely because of something that they did, and they deserved that they should be deposed of their position, or it could be some other thing. I mean, it could be purely something that someone else looks at them, and we look at that thing as a God's hand of justice. So I think that we need to be more pinpointed that to find out which is which.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Umar Farooq, please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, this is the Surah Azab, ayah number, I think, 72. I mean, this is the ayah where it is that we offered to the heavens, offered the manna to the heavens
Right.
and the earth and the
Right.
mountains, but they declined it, bear it.
Right.
So basically, I have a question from the last part, which is the human, any man who was basically the ignorant, and he was unjust and ignorant. Probably the translation is done here. So I mean,
Yes.
but it's very difficult to explain it. I read the Ghamidi Sahib's.
I get your question. Let me try to
Okay.
explain it. Actually, the word jahula, innahu kana zaluman jahula, are the words. So jahula has normally been wrongly translated by many commentators and many translators as ignorance, as you've pointed out. In Arabic, the word jahal is primarily used for a person who comes who has a frenzied attack, who becomes angry, and out of that anger, overcome with that frenzy, he does something wrong. It is like being provoked to do something wrong. So when the Almighty says innahu kana zaluman jahula, he actually means that he has the ability to cross the limits because he's zalim. He crosses the limits. The word zulum here means a person who will cross his limits. And the other is jahula, that he becomes provoked and does things which are beyond him. So what is being implied here is that human beings, they took the initiative and said that this trust of free will that was offered by God, if you look at the context, you'll find that the words inna aradna al-amanat ala samawati wal ard, that God actually consigned his amanat to the heavens and the earth. فَأَبَيْنَا أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا, they refused to bear it. وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ, and human beings said, okay, we will bear it. So you'll realize that the word amana is being used for the expression of free will, that a person who has the ability to freely choose his own path, which human beings have. They have the freedom of will, which of course the sun, the moon, the stars, and all these elements of nature, they don't have. So it does seem that as far as creation was concerned, that before being created, this was an option given to all mankind. I mean, not just mankind, but every creature or every creation, that would you like to have this expression, that you be given this freedom of expressing your will. And the all other elements of nature, they declined and said that we are comfortable as we are. And human beings, because they cross their limits, because they are provoked and they can go to the other side of things, to other extremes, because they have this disposition. So what the Quran is telling us is that the rest of the matter does not have this disposition. They are more reticent, they are more submissive. But human beings have this disposition of crossing the limits, of oppressing others, and because of this, when they are given this opportunity that, well, you will be able to exercise your free will, they leap to it and say, okay, I accept it. So this is what is being said in these verses. But
it also gives the impression that, like, Allah is saying that human beings basically were not capable, but they just leaped due to their intrinsic nature, like that. Is it true?
I mean, this is not correct, because you see, if you look at some of the other I mean, it's not just right to understand a particular verse of the Quran without actually looking to other similar verses. So we know that other similar verses are there which actually give us this picture that what is being said here is not that they are incapable. What is being meant here is that they have one thing in them which makes them very adventurous, which makes them, I mean, leap out to things that might be beyond them. That daring spirit, that thing, that spirit to do something which might be beyond them, that made them accept that challenge. So basically, it's like I mean, in a positive way, they are being told that because they have been given this disposition of being provoked and take up the challenge, so they just leapt and took the challenge. It was as if the gauntlet is thrown, and there are people who are being challenged by it, and human beings accepted it. So the other verses that I'm talking about are verses which tell us that there would be human beings, as we know from Surah Baqarah, that the Almighty, when the whole discussion with the angels came up, and they said that why is it that you are creating people who will cause disorder in earth and bloodshed? So on one occasion, it is said that the Almighty, Allama Adam al Asma kullaha, that is the area that Adam was actually taught the names of those outstanding people, and they were introduced before the angels also, and told that, well, look, this is Ibn Taymiyyah, this is Abu Hanifa, and this is such and such a person, or this is Muhammad, or these are the great personalities that would be created. So this knowledge of these outstanding personalities given by Adam to the angels at the time of creation, to tell them that the scheme of God is going to succeed. It's not that they are going to cause bloodshed. Yes, there would be people who would cause bloodshed as well, but on the other hand, there will be people who will make mankind proud of themselves. So that verse tells us that basically it's not an inability or something that was a deficiency. It's like telling them that they had this disposition to accept it. Not that that disposition was a sign of their lack of ability, but it's just the fact that the way they are created, they had this ambitious nature, they had this thing to leap up and do something which might be even beyond them.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Dr. Saleem. We're already over time, so we'll take. We have one question though. If you have enough time, it's a really short one.
Okay, go ahead.
They're asking if kingdomship, like the way it is in Saudi Arabia, is that non-Islamic?
It's not. It's certainly not. So the Islamic model is amruhum shura bainahum, which means that people have to be elected on the basis of mass consultation amongst the general common man. So their opinion has to be elicited, and if there's a difference of opinion, that the opinion of the majority will prevail. So the methodology of shura is exactly the same as that of democracy, and this years before democracy could even been born in our society in modern times, did the Quran say that amruhum shura bainahum, which meant that it's not dynastic politics. It has to be the will of the people that has to be implemented.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem, and thank you to all the participants for coming through, asking questions, participating in discussion, and thank you, Dr. Saleem, for another wonderful session. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow. Another session of textual study of the Qur'an. It's also, I find it really pretty helpful going through word by word translation and also the general concepts of what the Qur'an is going, since we've started off with Surah Al-Fatiha and now we're all the way in Surah Al-Nisa. So, inshallah, see you all tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.